over-socialized and subject to all kinds of disadvantages. So I want to focus in on prisons. One common justification is that prison is not all that bad. In fact, it needs to be harsher and less soft. Raise your hand if you've heard any of these comments about prisons. Prisoners eat steak. They watch TV all the time. They have access to the internet. They have a roof over their head paid by taxpayers and meals every day. Prisoners have it easy. In fact, they ask to be in prison. They like it. This information is easy to spread because prisons are largely closed systems. Access is permitted to only a few and it's screened. Regular citizens who do access institutions are allowed only into parts of the institution. In addition, the term prison applies to a range of institutions. For example, there are holding cells at police stations, so there'd be prison-like cells at the Fredericton Police Station, and also the RCMP station out on Regent Street, and also the courthouse just down the street here would have a holding cell. So those are a kind of a jail. There are remand units at provincial jails that detain persons who have not yet been sentenced. There are federal and provincial prisons. Provincial prisons hold persons serving 2 years less a day sentences. Federal prisons hold persons serving sentences over 2 years. There are also halfway houses where people on sentence live. There are also 4 healing lodges run by the federal government in various locations across Canada, as well as a regional psychiatric unit in Saskatoon. Some prisons have what's known as special handling units that are high security, so somebody like Clifford Olson is detained in a special handling unit, and almost all prisons and jails across Canada would have segregation units. So when we talk about prisons and jails, we're talking about a vast array of setups. So when people say, well, everybody has internet or television or it's really cozy, it needs to be clarified exactly what they're talking about. And all prisoners under federal sentencing law under Section 718 of the Criminal Code are supposed to be undergoing rehabilitation because it's listed as one of the principles of sentencing. So we as taxpayers and citizens have a right to insist that they're involved in programming that will enhance their capacity to live on the outside. So when people complain about prisons being too soft, it's important to think about prisons as encompassing this continuum that I talk about. It's important to ask questions about the specifics. Where is this steak supposedly being served? Where is the lineup of people supposedly seeking access to these so-called hotels? One point that needs to be made is that some serving prisoners are readying themselves for release. Thus, they may have certain privileges that are granted under the watch and control of correctional policies and staff. So they may be able to leave the institution to work, and they may have access to internet. For example, the Elizabeth Fry Society of Calgary provides pre-employment community programming for women who've been processed through Canada's criminal justice system and who've either been current or past parole or probation involvement, and these women are being taught employment readiness skills. On balance, the suggestion that prisoners sit around all day on cell phones, making drug deals, or watching Oprah is wrong. Recently, in April 2011, the government of Ontario canceled the cable television contracts it had arranged for its institutions due to the outrage by the Conservative Opposition Party. In response to the criticism, the Liberal government moved to cancel premium cable TV packages at 20 of the 32 provincial correctional institutions. So I'm not suggesting that there's never television, there's never internet. In fact, I've suggested there may be access to internet for people on release programs, or even in the Ontario system, they did have television. However, the NDP justice critic argued, clearly television is being used to babysit inmates in the same way busy parents use television to babysit their kids, and that's wrong. The reality is our provincial institutions, our reformatories, were gutted of their programs during the Harris Eve years. So it was true they did have access to cable television, but that was without other kinds of programming that would have been more productive and more conducive to change and transformation. The conservatives also took aim at creating writing programs and courses titled Freeing the Human Spirit yoga classes developed by a Zen master. It was pointed out that these services were offered by community groups like the John Howard Society as well as church groups on a volunteer basis. The conservatives argue that the government would rather coddle inmates than serve victims. They cited the case of Kelly Smith, whose son was killed and who had trouble accessing government resources for victims. So Kelly Smith's son was killed by a person named Quincy Callahan Thomas. So Quincy Callahan Thomas was 17 and he shot his friend Patrick Smith. And he shot Patrick Smith with an unregistered handgun that he was waving in the air, kind of showing it off, and it went off accidentally, and Patrick Smith was killed. His mother might have preferred if Callahan Thomas had been in yoga or writing classes rather than waving around a dangerous firearm that he was not trained to use. Okay. So, all of this is backdrop to my central arguments against prisonization, provides a context for my main points. So when I reflected on this talk and this subject, I came up with 4 reasons, main reasons against prison that are supported by the research of people like Justin Piche and as noted a few times on that work. So prisons are expensive. On average, it costs $100,000 a day plus to hold someone in a federal jail, and that's fairly well known. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. Prisons cost
a day.
Yes.
A day.
Yes. Over that. That's
per occupant. Per imprisoned person.
Yes, per federal inmate, on average, $100,000 a day. I saw statistics around incarcerated women prisoners. They're fairly old, but it was around $120,000 a day because of the smaller prison population. So on average, $100,000. And so in a provincial jail, it would be about $60,000, $70,000 per day. Okay. So my second point is that prisons and preoccupation with crime are political fixations, not practical. Prisons have political leverage. Get tough messages resonate with a fearful populace concerned about war, economic downturns, and facing the social distance created by social media, that's my point, where one may have more Facebook friends on the computer rather than a functioning social support network. So I'm arguing that we have a society that's more fearful, and although we have all these ways to connect, we're doing so less and less face-to-face, which is why the Occupy movement is such a refreshing option. We amuse ourselves by jeering from a distance at those whose lives seem to be in greater disarray. The problem with prison expansion policies is they reduce the issues to simple policies that ignore the complex array of issues involved in crime and punishment, such as mental health issues and inequality. At the same time, they quell the political claims of marginalized, disadvantaged segments of the population who might otherwise have a voice to advocate for greater distributive justice and less inequality. So prison expansion disengages dissent by masking the factors that propel people into crime and allows politicians to score easy political points while shifting the burden of management onto the police and prison guards who must daily confront the overcrowding and tensions in prisons and jails. So my third point is more prisons and tougher sentences do not better serve victims. In my view, victims are further insulted by being offered tough justice that promises to further punish offenders while failing to offer more to victims, including the prevention that might offer families what most victims wanted in the first place, to live lives without crime. Victims want justice. What is fanned is their taste for vengeance, leaving them in a permanent place of red zone trauma with little opportunity for resolution, which admittedly is hard to come by in the face of the most heinous crimes, such as having a child murdered. In my view, we hang victims out to dry by telling them that their only hope for any kind of meaningful life after crime is to stay deeply emotionally connected to the offense and the offender. A prominent victims advocate, Wilma Dirksen, lost her daughter due to violent crime in 1984, and the offense